Hi, my name is Aldo Buki. I'm a JavaScript ERPer expert, and today I'm going to show you how to get rid of callbacks when coding in JavaScript. In order to do so, we are going to create a fake social network application, and we're going to talk to it through an API. So let's imagine that we have the social network app, and these are our methods. Okay, so we have an API that exposes three methods, and we can get the name of a user, the last name of a user, and followers. And this social network has some data that I already put in there. So we are going to test this. Let's see if getName works. Okay, we have some users and they have some IDs. This is the ID of a user, and this should work. And getName A returns Aldo. So here on the left, whenever we make a call to the API, we're going to get some nice traces so we can see what's going on. Again, I'm going to run this script. It's going to go through this line, it's going to execute this function, and we're going to see what happens. GetName A, name of the person with ID A is Aldo. Awesome. If we were to get last name, we should see what's Aldo's last name? Buki. Okay, that's me. So these are working. Yeah, and get followers. I don't know if I have any followers. Let's see. Do I have followers? Yep, I have one follower, user B. Who is user B? Who's user B? Who's user B? It's Bob. Okay, so this is working. There are some users out there. Now, let's create a function that uses these, okay? We're going to create a getFullName function. The fullName function is going to have to call name and last name, okay? And it's going to look something like this. This is asynchronous programming, so you have a call to getName, and then you pass a callback, and then within this you pass, you call getLastName, and again you pass a callback. So this is what we usually end up coding when we're working with asynchronous JavaScript, and this is also known as the callback hell, because you start getting this nasty indentation, and even though we're just calling two functions here, things start looking pretty ugly, especially when we add error handling in here. So this block here, what it's doing is it's checking if this call returned an error, and if so, it is calling the callback with the error, and so on. Okay, so this is what you don't want to do in JavaScript. You want to avoid it. But let's see if the function works. Okay, get full name of A will call getName, getLastName, and should return the full name. Let's see if it works. And it does. Okay, this is my full name, and what happens under the covers is that it called getName with the ID A, then this the result came back, and then once we had the result, we call getLastName, and so on. Okay, that's great. It's working. Now we're going to create another more complicated function that's going to be called getFollowerFullNames. Okay, so the idea is that we're going to get the full name, but not just for one, but for all the followers of a given user. And that function would look something like this. We would first need to get the followers for the ID. Sorry, there should be an ID here. We should first need to get the followers. Once we have the followers, we need to loop over the followers array somehow and then call the function that we just created, which is getFullName. So here's where things start getting pretty ugly. Okay, how would you loop over an array and then send an asynchronous call? There are several strategies. One of them is to create an iterator function, and the iterator function will loop over the array and consume one after the other, and then on the callback it will call itself, and so on. But we're not going to write that because it will get pretty nasty. There are also some libraries that you can use, but we're going to go and do something way better. So we will import this library called Syncify. Okay, Syncify. We just require Syncify. I installed it using npm. So basically I did npm install Syncify. But I already did that, so I'm not going to do it again. Now I can require Syncify. And with Syncify, I can basically transform all my asynchronous functions into synchronous functions and forget that they are asynchronous. So here, for example, erase this. What I'm doing here is I am syncifying the previous functions, getName, getLastName, getFollowers. I am syncifying them, and I'm creating a synchronous version. GetName sync is the syncified version of getName. Okay, yeah, it's a pretty weird name, but in the end, it's just a synchronous version of an asynchronous function. Okay. Once we syncified the functions, we can compose them into the functions that we built before. We had get full name, that called get name and get last name, and then we had get followers full names, get follower full name, sorry. And we write them as if we were dealing with synchronous functions. So naturally, they end up being way, way shorter and way easier. Okay. So we basically skip all the callback hell. There's no callbacks here, no callbacks. Okay. Now, once we did this, in order to call these, we need to revert them into the async world again. And that's how we call Syncify, revert. Okay. Let's go over this again. We import Syncify. Once we have Syncify, we can call Syncify over any asynchronous function that we have, and we will get a synchronous version. From then on, we can forget that these libraries are asynchronous. We totally forget about that, and we treat them as if they were synchronous. And with that in mind, we can compose them as we please. In this case, we are getting the full name, which is the composition or the concatenation of these two calls, just as if they were synchronous. And get follower full names is just getting the followers and then mapping over the array through the get full name sync function. So there's nothing new here. The only thing is that you have to forget that they were synchronous, not asynchronous, sorry. Once we have that, we have to revert these syncified functions into, or we have to revert them back to the asynchronous world, which is what we're doing here, okay? This function here, we take it and we revert it, okay? And now we can call it. How do we call it? Well, we pass the parameter it takes, which is ID, and a callback, of course, because this will do some computations in the back. Let's run this and see if it works. And yep, it's working, okay? So we run get follower full names here, and we passed C, and this, what did it do? It went all the way here and it called get followers sync. There you go, get followers for C. Once we got the followers back, we mapped over the get full name sync function, which calls get name and get last name, and we can see that here, get name, get last name, get name. So it's working, okay? Where are the callbacks? I don't see them. They're gone. They're totally gone. That's a great thing about Syncify. You totally forget about callbacks. You don't have to use any weird functions. You just use regular JavaScript, and you forget about functions being asynchronous. Okay? That's pretty cool, right? Now, if you take a look at this, you can see that there's room for an optimization. We are calling get name, get last name, get name, get last name over each of the users, but we could call all of these in parallel, right? We don't need to wait for Aldo Buki to be ready for calling Bob Marley, right? And so if you were using callbacks, then we would be able to tweak our code in order to fire all the requests to the server at the same time and then wait for them. And so that's one place where having a callbacks and asynchronous programming has an advantage over imperative or synchronous programming. But we lost it, right? Since we're using Syncify, we lost the opportunity to manage that. But Syncify provides us with a way to get it back. So we're going to create a different version of get follower full names that maintains the parallelism, okay? And it looks something like this. So this is a bit more complicated. Before showing you how it works, I'm going to show you that it actually works. So we're going to call it now. And there you go. That was much faster. Because what we did is, first, we got the followers here, get followers. Once we got the followers, we fired get name and get last name for each of these at the same time. And then when all the replies came back, we gathered all and returned the output. So these were fired in parallel here, whereas here they were fired in series or in sequence, okay? How do we do that? Well, we basically told Syncify that this block here is parallel, okay? So we called Syncify.parallel, and then we pass a function which wraps a piece of code, and everything within that function will be considered to be a parallel call. So any async call that is generated within this block will be parallelized, okay? So the map function called over the array, which in turn calls get full name sync, is running in this parallel context, if you wish. The first call here is not in the parallel context, so it happens first. But then, when we get into the parallel context, all of them happen at the same time, which is exactly what we want. Okay, so I hope you like Syncify. Just to recap, let's go over what Syncify does. Okay, so you start with a function that takes an argument. Okay, this is an asynchronous function. You run it through Syncify, and then you get a function that does not have a callback, just like the first function, but without the callback. This is what we call a syncified version of the first function. This is a syncified version. And then you have to revert it in order to be able to call it again. But the trick is that here, once it is syncified, you can compose it with other syncified functions or any sync function, and without caring, and then you revert it. Okay, that's the trick, is that Syncify allows you to get into this intermediate world where things magically work as if they were synchronous. You can read more about how this is implemented in the GitHub repo, going here. But before that, let me warn you about a couple of things. The first one is you can only call Syncify on idempotent functions, or forget about idempotent. Let's say you can only call it on read-only functions, functions that read. You should not call it on functions that write. I'm not going to explain exactly why, but it's important that you remember that. And the second requirement is that the arguments to the functions must be JSON serializable. So if you're passing a string or a number, that's fine. If you're passing an object, that's fine, as long as it can be serialized. Okay? Now, regarding this first point, you may be thinking, boo, damn, man, I wanted to use this to compose transactions and call the database. And, well, let me tell you something. If you're thinking about that, then you're making a big mistake. You should never, ever use asynchronous functions to compose something that can be thought of as a transaction. So if you have a function that is modifying the database and say you're getting the balance of an account, and then after a few seconds you compute something, and then you increase the balance or withdraw money, right? Withdraw. Then you may be incurring into a inconsistency here, because if there's time happening between this and this and this, then there is no transaction isolation. Okay, so don't ever use asynchronous functions for writing. If you're going to hit, if you need to modify the state, then you should call a method on the server side that includes everything, an atomic method. Okay, so in that sense, this is not a limitation. It is in fact a good thing. Okay, so it will make you think twice. Now, you can read more on the GitHub repo. Okay, it's on my GitHub repo, aldonline/Syncify. Thank you very much. Hope you have fun with Syncify, and see you soon.